Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students brought to you by UJS. I'm Matty, your digital engagement sabbatical officer, and I'm so excited we are finally launching this podcast.
This is our first episode recorded with Baroness Anderson. For a bit of context, this episode was recorded back in September, way before the atrocious attacks of Hamas on the 7th of October, hence why it isn't mentioned. Please enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students brought to you by UJS. I'm Emmy and I'm the campaign SAB here at UJS.
And I'm Daniel. I go to the University of Bristol and I'm the Vice President of Bristol JSOC.
Today we've got a really exciting guest. Baroness Anderson of Stoke-on-Trent was first elected to Parliament in 2015 and she became a member of the House of Lords in 2022, and she's been at the forefront of fighting anti-Semitism in the Labour Party for many years.
We're delighted to welcome Baroness Anderson to the podcast today to learn more about her various roles in Labour, student politics and anti-Semitism. Baroness Anderson, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. It's quite hot today as we're recording. We're in a very air-conditioned room, so I'm actually wearing a jumper, and that's why the difference in clothing is so stark.
Yeah, no, the UJS office is actually quite nice. I can confirm.
Excellent. I'm pleased someone feels cool and calm and collected. I can't promise that that's what you're going to get from me.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
Should we start at the beginning, I guess? Do you want to tell us a bit about your childhood and like how you grew up, where you grew up?
My mum is spectacular and brilliant, and I'm the only child, and my mum was a single parent. So just to completely confuse everybody, because I definitely don't sound like it, I was born in Edinburgh, and then ended up in the East End of London when I was very little, hence the accent. My grandparents are from the East End. And then because of my mum's job, when I was 7, we moved to Bristol, so to a very small Jewish community. But the women in my life are the ones who are completely and totally extraordinary. So my grandmother, Nana, was very little to some of you, but to your parents it will be a thing. There used to be a kosher catering hall called the Royal Majestic, where everyone had their bar mitzvahs and their weddings, and my grandmother made the chicken soup for like everybody. So there isn't all of your grandparents, probably, if they went to a wedding or a bar mitzvah in London until 2000, would have had my grandmother's chicken soup, and which I don't think many people can claim that. Her knedels were amazing. But we ended up in I spent most of my childhood in Bristol, where there are 2 small Jewish communities. My mum wasn't going to sort of impose Judaism on me, but at the age of 11 I decided that I wanted to go to shul, and I went to the liberal shul in Bristol, and I was bat mitzvahed and I taught a cheder, and but it's a tiny little community. It's a wonderful community. So and we had, and then I went to university in Birmingham, and then politics came.
Oh, right. So what was it like being a Jewish student at university? I mean, did you think it impacted you in any sort of way, or
No, so I started university in 1997. And I went to Birmingham. There was a big Jewish community, but I'd come from such a small Jewish community. I was the only Jewish kid at my secondary school. I had bizarrely had 2 Jewish teachers, and one of them, their wives, had taught me my portion from my bat mitzvah. So it was all a bit, it wasn't a huge community by any stretch. So when I arrived in Birmingham and there were Jews, I was a bit confused. And beyond my family. And then what I found incredibly reassuring, though, was that the rabbi would come and check on us every term, and just to make sure no one in my family had ever gone to university before. This was a brand new thing, but the only thing my grandmother was aware of was UJS. So she gave me money to join the JSOC. Like, that was an incredibly important thing to her. And when I went to this, does not sound good for J. I mean, I love UJS.
It would be bad if you didn't.
I love UJS. I went to my first JSOC meeting, and everyone already knew each other, and I was like the only Jew from Bristol that had turned up. I think if I'd have gone to university in Bristol, it would have been different. But because I'd gone to Birmingham and everyone knew each other, and I knew nobody. It was quite a thing, and it wasn't the most welcoming of things. So I didn't get involved in the community at university.
When was it? Oh, sorry, carry on.
No, go on.
I was saying, when was it that you did start getting involved in the Jewish community?
So I had been a theatre teacher until I was 18. Like I did all the way through, and my synagogue was so lovely. And I kept I tried to keep kosher for, I don't know, my household isn't doesn't keep, we've never kept a kosher house, and I tried to keep kosher when I was at university, when I was sharing with non-Jews. I mean, that was fun for about an hour, but for 2 terms I tried really hard to keep kosher, and really difficult. So my Judaism has always been part of my identity, but not necessarily part of my politics, if that makes sense. So it was like a personal identity, but I'd go home for the high holy days, and I would go to shul at home rather than stay out on campus. And then it was always, I was Jewish but not Jewish. So I was I suppose it was the political manifestation of my Judaism was in my anti-fascism, and I campaigned against the far right from like the age of 12. I went on my first demonstration against the National Front had a demo in Bristol when I was 13, and I went on the other side of the demo. So like the manifestation of my Judaism was through my politics, and then but my anti-fascist politics rather than my Labour politics. And I campaigned against the far right everywhere. And I suppose getting involved in the community, I was sort of friends with lots of the political Jews of my generation, but I came at it from, I was a Labour Party and trade union activist who happened to be Jewish. I wasn't a Jewish community activist. That changed when I became a member of Parliament, but I always happened to be Jewish. It was part of my identity, but not like first and foremost. That changed slightly when I went to work at BICOM. So I became head of public affairs at BICOM in 2004. And I was very young. I mean, very young. We're going to focus on the very, very young bit, because I'm old now, very young. And that brought me into the community.
Yeah, interesting. So sort of in terms of your career within Labour and as an MP, I mean, sort of what age did you start actively getting involved with the party, and then the processes of being selected, and how did it come about, basically? Yeah.
Oh, so now I'm going to sound like a complete political geek, right? So
it's fine.
My mum is brilliant and extraordinary and fabulous, and but she was also a trade union official. So from a very, very young age, like 9, I had to submit an annual pay claim for my pocket money. Wow. And I had to negotiate my pocket money increases. So and like errands that you would always include in as a child, the things that you're going to earn your pocket money, mine did include delivering my mum's Labour Party leaflets. So, which I did before I started secondary school. And then in the 1992 by-election, in the 1992 general election, I was 12, and I door knocked for the first time in the general election.
So
as 12. Yeah.
Wow.
So I door knocked. I can't imagine what I said other than "we're lovely and they're horrible." But for those people who have not met me, I'm nearly 6 foot, so I was quite tall even at 12, so probably looked older. So I've been campaigning for the Labour Party. I've been door knocking for the Labour Party for 32 years. Wow. Which does not make me feel young at all, but it does mean that there isn't sort of, so the Labour Party was sort of our political identity. And because my mum was a trade union official, even when if I was sent home from school with a cold or I was ill, I would be at her, I'd go with her to work, because there was no other option. We lived in Bristol, my grandparents lived in London. So I would be at the back of a trade union meeting with a duvet and orange juice, probably, and always food. Always, obviously. But I'd be at back of political meetings, even both going with her, but also when I was little, even if I was poorly. So it was a normal thing for me to be sort of around the Labour movement. Just because, my grandmother was brought up in the East End. My great grandparents came from Eastern Europe and they fled the pogroms. So my grandmother was politically active and did things that she never wanted us to know. So in the run up to the Battle of Cable Street in 1936, that for those of you who are listening and don't know what that is, but it's it was a big anti-fascist battle in the East End of London when the Nazis wanted to walk through Jewish areas. My grandmother put razor blades in tomatoes for the 48 hours in the run up to it to be used as weapons against the Nazis. Also in 1936, there were, but she never wanted my mum and I to know because she didn't want us to get ideas.
Right. Well, against Nazis.
She also, though, and I think that this is very much a woman thing. Sorry. But in 1936, there was also the Jarrow March for Jobs. People in the northeast marched to London to demand the right to work because unemployment was so high. And at that point, it was a walk. Like, that was a very, very long way to go. And my grandmother knitted socks because she had appreciated as a working class woman that it wasn't just food that they were going to need when they got to central London. They would have walked through their socks as working class men. They would have walked through their socks. So my grandmother knitted socks in the run up to the Jarrow marches and arrived with food parcels and socks for them. And she was a normal working class woman, but understood her social responsibilities. And then my mother, that is the moral set that my mum and I were given by this extraordinary woman who made us do things.
And do you think it was these women in life, these moral boundaries, that made you want to become an MP?
Yeah, so when I was very young, my grandmother was a very literate woman. She was a very, very bright woman, and we lived on a council estate in the East End. And my grandmother was she was the most literate of all of her friendship group. So every Wednesday afternoon, the other older women on the council estate, who she had known her whole life, but whose husbands would have passed away, they brought their paperwork that they would have received over the week to my grandmother. And my grandmother would sit there and read their paperwork for them and ask them what they wanted to do, like read it out loud for them, and then would draft letters for them to go back to what needs to be done. Now, that's almost a counsellor's surgery. But that was what my family did. And then my mum was a trade union officer. My first job in the Labour movement was being a trade union officer, and I thought that was my dream job. But there's only so much that you can do until you change the law. So and sometimes the law really needs change, so you need people who can argue for that. And that's why I wanted to become an MP. Like, I'd always been political, but standing for election, I stood for election for the first time in 2010. Doing that was truly because the law needed changed, and people who don't have as strong voices as us, who aren't as fortunate to know how the system works, or who candidly aren't as gobby, getting them a place, being there for them, that's what I was trying to do. And that's why I wanted to get elected. It was to be someone else's voice.
So you finally got elected in 2015. I mean, how did that feel? I guess you kind of only had, well, not long before then Corbyn was elected as leader, but sort of how did you feel about the 2015 election? Because we're getting a bit of echo.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, well, how did you feel about the 2015 election, in the sense that, on a personal level, it was a great success for you, but obviously Ed Miliband didn't win.
So it was heartbreaking because no one wants to be a politician in opposition. Like, you want to do these things because you want to make a difference. There is a huge amount a backbench MP can do to support their constituents, but you can't change the law. Or if you can, it's very small, and it's you begging the government and finding the arguments that work with the government. So I was completely elated to have got elected, but knew that I had a hard slog in front of me. And I also thought that I needed to invest as much time as possible in my seat, because by the time we got to the next general election, which I thought was going to be in 2020, it was not. I would have, by the time we got to that point, I would be needed to go and support other people, because I represented a seat that had always been Labour. Turns out it was not always going to be Labour, but that was a whole different thing. So I arrived in Westminster. I was genuinely excited, knew what I wanted to do, knew how I was going to spend my time. Joined Yvette Cooper's campaign team to be leader of the Labour Party, and then Jeremy Corbyn happened and my life changed beyond all recognition pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think, when did you realise that there was something fundamentally wrong? Was it as soon as he was elected, or was it kind of something as soon as you were elected, or was it more incremental than that?
So there was a lot of pressure. I was a brand new MP, and there was a lot of pressure on who you were going to nominate as there was a really powerful role of MPs to be gatekeepers for the leadership of their parties. For both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, MPs they get to decide what the shortlist is to go to the party membership. I realised there was a huge problem, or that was coming, when we suddenly got all of these £3 members who were not invested in the future of my party. And by that point, I had been involved in my party. The Labour Party is me, right? And I've dedicated my life to the Labour Party and the Labour movement. And it's like, who are these people who don't know where have they come from and what do they want? And Jeremy Corbyn had always been a challenging figure. So I went with Yvette. There was a JLM hustings for the leadership. And I went with Yvette. Luciana went with Andy Burnham. And Corbyn was there. And this was not a place where Corbyn was going to feel comfortable, but John Landsman had taken Corbyn. And it became really clear that not only was he not comfortable in that group with those people, but that that his views on Israel were so visceral that whether consciously or not, he really struggled in a room where people went to Israel. Candid, if I'm not even going to take it further than that, at that point, it was just our association with Israel was just too much for him. And at that point, but he was already doing really well. And I was a brand new MP, and I was my constituency, the Labour Party, chose not to nominate because it would be too divisive. And that was like, I'd been an MP for a month. That something new's about to happen then. This is odd. And then I was there for the result, because I'd been part of Yvette's team, and I was an MP, so I was in the room when it was confirmed that Corbyn was the leader. And I was sat next to Kate Ossamore, and she was obviously completely over the moon because her candidate had won. And I couldn't stand up. I was sort of in shock. And she sort of elbowed me, because also the cameras were there and it was the Labour Party and we didn't know what was going to happen next. And so she elbowed, you have to stand up and clap. I was like, oh, okay. And then it was like, I can't believe this has just happened. What is this? But I was very proud to be part of Yvette's campaign team, because Yvette was the only one, in my opinion, that tried to stand up against Corbyn.
Can you just briefly explain, for those who may not be aware, what JLM is? Okay,
sorry, yes. So the Jewish Labour movement used to be called Pole Zion, was one of the original parts of the Labour Party. So the Labour Party is a broad synagogue, as we would now say, but was founded by, everyone says it's founded by the trade unions, and it was, but it was founded by the trade unions and the Methodist Church and the Jewish community, who all came together in sort of protest about what was happening in the community, in society at that point. And Pole Zion, the Jewish Labour movement, was the earliest affiliate to the Labour Party to be an affiliated socialist society. So it was a space for Jews to be Jews, but with the view that we completely supported the Labour Party. But it was sort of a space for Jews to be Jews, and there are other faith groups and other community groups that also have the similar, so LGBT Labour. There's other groups as well that hold similar space in the party.
Interesting. So sort of on that, do you think that, I mean, this is going a bit further forward in time, but in terms of Labour conference this year, which I'll be going to, I'm very excited. Do you think that JLM's role is going to be very different to how it has been in recent years? Because obviously, yeah, it's not been.
JLM's been on a journey, and what I love is that I hope for a lot of people listening to this, you weren't aware of the detail of what was going on inside the Labour Party. You just knew the Labour Party was bad, and now, please God, you know the Labour Party is good. And you get to decide how you want to vote, not because you're scared of a political party, but because of whether a political party matches your worldview. Like that should always have been the options available. JLM was at the forefront, led the fight against Jeremy Corbyn and his anti-Semitism and the anti-Semitism of his friends within the Labour Party. And he and that put us in a very difficult place. So we voted not to disaffiliate, not to leave the Labour Party. We came close, but we did a vote of censure of Corbyn. We, as a group, decided that we would only campaign for, well, as it turned out, basically we were campaigning for me to try and get me re-elected, but we would only campaign in certain areas to support candidates who were staunch JLM. We did other campaign days, obviously, but JLM, I will be forever grateful for every Jew around the country who came to campaign in Stoke-on-Trent, a place I don't think anyone had been to. There's like 15 Jews in Stoke-on-Trent, of which my mother and I are 2. And everyone came to try and help and brought me bagels, which was amazing because I needed them. And so JLM's role now is different. We've worked really closely with Keir, and Keir has been immense. Keir has done more than we asked of him at every opportunity to fix what was broken. And our role now is, I think, there's a big conversation, but up until this point, the JLM events at conference for JLM, we were the vanguard of trying to fix the party or fight for the heart and soul of the Labour Party. JLM events became that place where people came to articulate that. Now there is a debate about what JLM looks like going forward. We're part of the bridge between the Labour Party and the community to say it's okay. But also, I think, given what happened to us should never have happened to us. It is a huge cloud in the history of the Labour Party. It was a horrible, horrendous experience, truly life-changing for me and for many others. And I think we now have a responsibility to be the people who act almost as the moral conscience of the Labour Party. I hope never happens to us again. I don't believe it will happen to us again. But we're at the vanguard of an anti-racist fight. We need to be that group to protect other people now, and to call it out when we see it happening.
So, kind of circling back to what you experienced as an MP under Corbyn, you've spoken, and I think other MPs have spoken, that it was a very particularly kind of misogynistic form of anti-Semitism. And do you think that there are perceptions and preconceptions that as Jewish women we have to deal with that perhaps Jewish men don't?
So yes. And I think yes. And racism can and usually is gendered, and misogyny happens to women on a regular basis anyway, to women who are in the public eye, and then you add in any of our protected characteristics and that just makes it a billion times worse. But what happened was uniquely awful for Jewish women, and And not least the fact that there were 4 Jewish women in the Parliamentary Labour Party who were not going to be silenced, and we made that very, very, very clear. And in different and all have different strengths and weaknesses, but as a collective force, I wouldn't mess with us. So Luciana, Louise Ellman, Margaret Hodge, and that's a formidable group of women. And the only way they thought they could deal with us was to silence us and threaten us, and it was horrendous. And if I give you an example of quite how Mike Katz, who is the chair of the Jewish Labour Movement, he and I did a joint letter. I was parliamentary chair and he was chair, and it was another one of the myriad of letters that went over this period of time. But it was a public letter to Corbyn about, I don't know, someone that knew that needed to be thrown out of the Labour Party. And as I signed it off, it was quite a punchy letter. Most of our letters got punchier and punchier. As I signed it, Mike and I were in my office, and I was like, "I'm so sorry because your social media is about to look grim." And he went, "No, it isn't." I was like, what do you mean? I'm going to get a death threat based on this. I know I'm going to get a death threat based on this.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, watch, I won't have a single piece of abuse. You'll get it all.
Mm-hmm.
And our names were literally on the same letter.
Mad.
And it was, and he was right. It was like, this is just extraordinary. They think that I can be silent. First of all, I was a member of Parliament with parliamentary privilege. No one was going to silence me. And secondly, have you looked at anything I've said? Do you think there's a chance that I'm going to be quiet? Because that doesn't seem to have happened so far. But that was, so it was worse for the women.
Yeah.
And when hate is gendered, it also then becomes sexualized. And so the threats of violence become sexualized threats of violence, as well as other. So it's a different approach.
And how did kind of having this, as it were, force against this racism, this force of women, how did your relationships with those women change and evolve during that time?
Margaret Hodge is like the best woman in the whole world. Like Louise and Luciana I knew well before, but I didn't know Margaret as well as I do now. Margaret, I'd die in a ditch for Margaret. Margaret is I love Margaret. Yeah. She is warm and feisty and cannot be stopped. She is a force of nature. I love her. So I ended up closer than I realised. And obviously as well, Margaret and I ended up being the last 2 left. We chose to stay and fight. There were no good, by the way, there were no good answers to what we needed to do. There wasn't a right or wrong decision. But Margaret and I made the decision to stay, so it did end up as Margaret and I against the world. Luciana and Louise made different decisions, and also they both represented the same city, whereas Margaret and I, that was different. So we had different experiences. Both my CV was incredibly supportive on the day that my constituency. On the day that there was a vote of no confidence passed in Luciana for her stance against Corbyn, my constituency Labour Party passed a unanimous vote of solidarity with me. So I had a very, very different type of experience than Luciana. But and in no small part I had that because my extremely brilliant, wonderful mother moved to Stoke-on-Trent. So my mum got involved in the Labour Party. My stepdad came out with me on every door knock because of the level of threat. My stepdad, who isn't Jewish, learnt Krav Maga.
Wow.
So, and was on every door knock I did.
Amazing.
Because I was never, for 3 years, such was the level of threat, I wasn't ever allowed to be by myself.
Wow.
And not by myself in public.
How do you cope with something like that? I've heard in interviews Luciana Berger has mentioned that she watched Love Island, and that was her mechanism of coping, is she'd switch off every night and watch Love Island. Did you have a Love Island, as it were?
I powered through with work, which just makes me sound really sad. This is going to sound... I fell in love with Stephen Fry's voice. So I went to bed every night listening to Harry Potter. I'm like, I was in my 40s, but Stephen Fry's voice is probably the only thing that could get me to sleep at various points. And that was and I spent a lot of, one of the things I found really difficult, it's not a bad thing at all, but I couldn't go out freely with my friends. So there was a lot of socializing was done in my house or in their houses, because safety had become like, I couldn't afford to have like more than 2 drinks if I went out, because I would therefore not be as safe as I would otherwise have been, and getting home and all of those things. So I spent a lot of time with my close family and friends. So my life changed, you know, so those things changed different, like that became different. And trying to think, did I probably definitely watch crap TV? But that would be like, I just watched really crap TV. It wouldn't have even been as highbrow as Love Island. It would have been really crap TV.
Place in the Sun, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or so it'd been like, all right, so I know what I did. So I rewatched on repeat The West Wing, because politics could be better than this.
My favourite. I love. I watched it during my university finals, because it was the only thing that would help me cope.
And just needed, because you know, there is an alternative world where the world could look nicer than this. For my so I was 40 in 2019, which means I know most of you were, you know, most of the people listening to this, we're not going to talk about when you were born. But my 40th birthday party, I had a 1997 general election themed party.
Things can only get better, music.
Things can only get better. We had it on, and we had the 1997 election scrolling all the way through. And Vernon Coker, who's one of my friends who got elected in 97, came, and we stopped it at the moment that he got elected. So you can see him on stage. Like we did like proper, there was party, we had banners up, we had, everything was 97 themed. All the music that was playing in the background as well was from 1997. So it was like, because I need, politics can, should, and will be better than what we were experiencing at that point.
So I kind of wanted to ask about 2019, the election. You lost your seat, and kind of, how did you sort of deal with that? How did you cope? Because that's quite a big, and it's like you're being thrust into the unknown again, I guess.
So losing your job on national television, probably not something many people experience. But I knew from the moment the election was called, I knew my electorate. Like, I knew from the moment my election was called, I wasn't going to win. We didn't. So we ran the election campaign was brilliant. We had so much fun. We're ignoring the result part of this, but you know, I had so much fun. We only had people come to campaign with us who shared our worldview. So if they arrived and told me how brilliant Jeremy Corbyn was, we asked them to leave and not come back. And it was because if I was going out on my terms and about the issues that I cared about. We thought it was fun. Like, we genuinely had a really fun 5 weeks, knowing for what the result was going to be. And so when the Gareth Snell, who's now my partner, but wasn't then, and was the MP for Stoke-on-Trent Central, he loves account, like relishes going to account. It's his idea of heaven. It's his Christmas. So he is there from 1 minute past 10. As soon as, well, in fact, he's usually there for 10 to 10, so he can be there as the votes arrive. It's heaven for him. And I've never gone to account till I know what the result is, when my name's on the ballot paper. But from the moment the exit poll was published, we knew I'd lost. Like, we knew I'd lost before, but that confirmed it. And that was sort of empowering. So it wasn't going to be close. It wasn't going to be, I knew I'd lost. I didn't know how awful Jonathan Gullis was going to be as a human being and as an MP, but I did know that I wasn't going to be their MP anymore. So as I did my hair, put some lipstick on, did what's got to be, as my mum would My mum would say tits out. So walked in and walked into the count, and there was a lot of media there because I had been so outspoken about Corbyn. So every media outlet was present. I walked straight into the media scrum and said, who wants to interview me? I've lost. Not quite what I said, but who wants to interview me?
For the sake of this podcast, that is what you said.
Yeah.
Yes. There was some swearing. There were bad words about Jeremy Corbyn, and who'd like me to say them on national television. And I did a series of interviews. Called for Corbyn to resign immediately. Called him a racist. No one would let me call him an anti-Semite. They sort of shut down the interview. So the only place that would let me call him an anti-Semite was the Guardian.
Yes.
Really weird. And did what you do, which is go and thank all the people that had got the election done and congratulated my opponent and did it properly, and then went home and slept because it had been. I had at no point allowed myself to breathe through what had happened when I was an MP, like to take time to reflect on it. So I took a little bit of time. It is a horrible thing to make your staff redundant in the run up to Christmas, and I had to do that. And I was adamant I wasn't, and then I had to think about helping them get jobs as well as what I was going to do next. Because as old as 40 may sound to your listeners, it is very, very young to have, my dream job that I thought I was going to have for the rest of my life, I now have to go and do something else. And then COVID hit, so I was thinking about my future and looking for jobs when you weren't allowed to leave your home. So that was fun for nobody. But I got an amazing job, and so Trevor Phillips, who from Sky fame, but Trevor is the chair of the charity that I am the chief executive of, and I run a charity called Index on Censorship, which publishes the work of political dissidents from Russia and Hong Kong and Afghanistan and Myanmar. And so we provide a platform, Belarus, we provide a platform to people whose voices are silenced by their own governments. So it's a lovely job to get to do. It's a privilege to get to do that. And in the middle of COVID, bad leaders, dictators, tyrants use COVID as an excuse to shut down all media and to close newspapers and to shut public libraries forever. So, we had work to do.
And then you were made a baroness.
I was.
Indeed. Yeah. And how did that change? How have you found the difference? Firstly, how did it feel when you were made a baroness? What was that feeling like?
Oh, I think it's the most ridiculous thing in the whole world. I knew I was going into the second chamber, and that's fine. That makes sense. But when I walked in and they called me a lady, it's like, oh my God, what is that? What? Like in a... and now it's really funny. I did some media on, I'll come back to what the Lords is like, but I did some media on the local election day in Stoke, which was, we had all our elections this year and the Labour Party took back control of the council for the first time in 8 years. And my as I'm walking into the count, my mum said, can I remind you, the King has made you a lady and you're going to do media, so you need to behave like one. Oh, okay. All right. So the Lord is an extraordinary place. I was terrified about going in. It's it had not been my aspiration. But things happen in life, right? And it was I think it is brilliant how many Jewish candidates the Labour Party's got at the next general election. But they are Labour Party people who happen to be Jewish, I hope. Like, they'll get to choose whether they want to be Jewish or not. But they just happen to be candidates. Because of the fights that Luciana, Louise, Margaret and I had, that my abuse still continues for just being me, and that would have been very difficult to stand for election again. So Keir made a different decision for me, and that was very, very kind of him. But I am the youngest woman on the Labour benches in the House of Lords. The level of expertise. So I'm a whip now, and I'm a DEFRA spokesman and a defence spokesperson for the Labour Party. And I was in a defence debate yesterday, and there were 5 former Chief of the Defence Staff spoke in the debate. So when you're going to talk about, if you're going to, I covered for someone and did a debate on the future of the law officers, and 8 King's Counsel spoke in the debate. And I was speaking on behalf of the Labour front bench, and I am not a lawyer. I did politics and international relations at university. I am of no help whatsoever in this conversation. And so the level of expertise in the House of Lords is pretty spectacular and extraordinary. In my first week as a member of the House of Lords, I heard the Archbishop of Canterbury lead his annual debate. He gets a debate that's his once a year. And he did it on the immoral nature of the government's immigration policy. This was in December last year. I heard Lord Hall, who used to run the BBC, talk about the economic future of the BBC, and Lord Winston, give what I can only describe as a brief lecture on genetic engineering, because there was a genetic engineering bill going through Parliament. He was the only one who knew what any of it meant. But and I'm still not sure I understand anything he said. But I had a privilege of sitting there listening to an extraordinary brain. I've sat there and listened to Alf Dubs talk about immigration. Alf was kinder transport. When he talks about unaccompanied children coming to the UK, he talks about it from a level of expertise that no one else in that room can talk about. I sat in the International Women's Day debate and heard extraordinary women. I exclude myself from this, but you don't get to go in the House of Lords unless you've genuinely contributed something quite extraordinary. So the Bishop of London, who is a member of the House of Lords, she was the youngest ever government chief nurse in the UK.
Wow.
And then she became the first ever female Bishop of London.
Incredible.
And had worked her. So there are extraordinary people in that building whose contribution is just amazing. And you sort of sit there and go, I learn something new every time I sit in there. And I don't know how you replicate that level of contribution in an elected chamber, because the joy of the Lords to the Commons and now having experienced both is no one cares about a clip for Facebook. Like, no one needs to mention their constituency 12 times and cares about it. If they don't, they have a level of expertise that they're going to share. They might only come in and talk about the issue of which they are a world-leading expert on, but they're a world-leading expert on it. So they might only come in twice a year, but when their subject matter is being discussed, they're going to be there. And I just don't know how you replicate that.
So you would then be against abolishing it, because Labour's current policy is to, in some capacity, after the Brown Commission, to abolish or replace or replace.
There needs to be a second chamber.
Yeah.
The quality of legislation that comes from the Commons is dreadful, and the legislation needs scrutinised.
Yeah.
The House of Lords is democratically unjustifiable. It is amazing, but it is unjustifiable, and not least the fact that we have hereditary peers. I can't justify that someone's there because of who their parents are. Like, it is insane that is the case. And so there's scope for huge reform. What I'd be nervous about is an elected second chamber that just led to more. I've knocked on hundreds of thousands of doors. Like, I door knock every week now, never mind when I was an MP. I've never heard anyone ask for more politicians. Like, that is not something I think the electorate has ever asked for. And how you balance it out, and how we make sure, and if you're going to have an elected second chamber, how the Commons is still right now, and we saw it with the Illegal Immigration Act, as it now is, the Stop the Boats bill. we won the Lords. There were huge amendments put through, and the government kept losing every vote. But we got to a point where where the Commons' voice had to be heard, rightly, because they're the elected house. But if I was also elected and I fundamentally disagreed with something the Commons was doing, I would have exactly the same rights as a member of the Commons to say no. And I think that then you have, given that we don't have a written constitution, how you change things is going to have to be done very carefully. And I wouldn't want to lose some of the contribution that some of the lawyers make, or you have lawyers that earn £10,000 an hour. Like, there are some people who are extraordinary people who are out there, and they come in for the day to talk in a debate where they'll get paid 300 quid or £342. They are doing what they would consider to be their public service by helping make legislation better. I think we need to make sure we don't lose what is an extraordinary thing that we have, an asset that most people don't realise is there, because we need more elections. So there needs to be a level of democratic accountability, without doubt. We need to reform hugely. But do we need to get rid? I don't know. We'll see what I mean, my personal view is we don't. I think we can change this dramatically. One of the issues I have, I think some of the hereditaries are amazing and I work with them, but they're all men. So it completely skews by definition, they're all men. So it completely skews the nature of the house. They're also overwhelmingly Tory.
Interesting. Yeah.
So there's only 3 Labour hereditaries of the 96.
Wow.
So it completely skews the numbers. But anyway, without doubt, there will be reform, and then we'll see what the party come up with in terms of an alternative solution. But we shouldn't lose the flavour.
Kind of broaden the question out to ask you a kind of more hypothetical, bigger question. So for a lot of students, university is the first place that they'll get involved in politics, in student politics, in, conservative clubs, Labour clubs, this sort of thing. But there seems to be a sort of gap. It's like people will be really involved in university and then don't become directly involved in politics until much later. There's a real sort of deficit of young people in the Commons as MPs. Do you think people like Keir Mather, who's the newly elected MP for Selby and Ainsley? Selby and Ainsley, it's written here. So do you think people like Keir Mather, who's the newly elected MP for Selby and Ainsley, do you think he's an exception to the rule, or do you think he's part of a new wave?
I think so. I stood for election for the first time to go into Westminster in a target seat. So it was a seat that we were hoping to win. I hoped to be an MP. I got selected when I was 28. If you think about Rachel Reeves is the same age as me, and she got elected in that parliament when I didn't. She got elected in 2010. So she got elected when she was 30. So there is a group of, if you look at the shadow, Wes Streeting turned 40 this year. So there are a group of politicians who are very much young, who are younger, who have a different approach. But Blair was really young when he got elected. Gordon Brown was really young when they got elected. Like, there is not it's the right person for the right seat with the right view that can win over members. And fundamentally, when you look back on your own, and all of you will, it's like, why did anyone let me do that when I was that young? It was like, what were they thinking? Actually, because they see something in you that you don't see in yourself yet. And if you've got the confidence to grab onto that, to hold on to that, then you absolutely should. And I think we've got to have a balance of worldviews and of lived experiences. So absolutely, Nadia Wisham, who was a carer, absolutely has something huge to contribute into Parliament, regardless of her politics. because that's a different life view that a different lived experience that she's had. I think one of the things that we need to do is ensure that there is a range of voices and of opinions and of personalities that come into our political space. What I don't want to do is that people don't want to contribute, don't want to join because they think that it's horrible. And I am not the greatest role model for saying come and be an MP and it'll be loads of fun. But it's such an honour and a privilege, and I want hundreds of women to come behind me and become members of parliament, because that is the only way that parliament changes, and it's the only way the world changes for a better. Look how much has changed since women became MPs, and how much equality legislation has been passed since women became MPs, and how the world has changed in no small part because women became MPs. So I don't want the doors to be closed behind. I think that people, if they think they've got something to contribute, and they go and work for it. But that's the thing, you have to go and work for it. No one should assume they're going to get gifted something. They're not. I was a very young parliamentary candidate, but I'd also, by that point, 27, I've been campaigning for the Labour Party for 15 years. I mean, it's I've been a member of the party. There wasn't anything I hadn't done. I'd also run a national anti-fascism campaign. I had campaigned against Nazis. There are different things that different skills bring. The only thing I would say, the only caveat, I think Keir's going to be an amazing MP, and I think the people of Selby are really lucky to have him. The caveat I have is making sure people, especially right now with the cost of living crisis and the world being as it is, people are going to come and see you when they are terrified and at their lowest ebb. And you have to have the confidence to know you can help them. So there's a big part of that you need to make sure that someone came to see me, and they came to my office because I was the only woman in the city who was in a position of elected who'd been raped by her neighbour. And the police had got it wrong, and although they charged him, they hadn't stopped him going back to his house. So she was going to see him every day waiting for the trial date. So we needed to move her because they weren't going to move him. And she'd come to me because I was a woman. I think we just need to make sure that there are a range of voices that can be heard that can support people like her.
Yeah. And how do we do that? How do we make sure that there are more women, that there are, people who represent people that aren't represented?
So that's on us. That really is on us, right? So going out, and I will mentor anybody that has aspiration. But then there's also, so I was really lucky. There is a wonderful man. His name's Ian Riley, and he, in 2007, I went and had coffee with him and said, I think I'd like to stand in a safe Tory seat at the next election to learn how it all works. And he went, all right. And then about a month later, I got a phone call. I wasn't standing in a safe Tory seat. Would I go to this place and start having conversations here, please? And I think we need to do more of that. You see someone that you think is special, well, let's see what we can do to help them. And we collectively can do that. There's nothing to stop us doing that. And for those of us who, have grey hair, but very good hairdressers, we can help make sure that those people are mentored and have opportunities and engage. I will do that always.
So moving from Keir Mather to Keir Starmer,
yeah.
What's
such
your
a smooth transition?
very smooth, yeah,
very, very smooth.
Lots of Keirs. Keir Hardie as well, but obviously not a president. Yeah. Anyway, so what's your relationship like with Keir Starmer? And how are you feeling about his leadership and the election?
Oh, Keir's had a great week. For those of you who don't know what when we're recording, but this is Keir's done the reshuffle this week and has strengthened his team and got ready for the general election campaign this week. Keir is a really, really good man, and he's a kind man, and his personal value set is clear. He's also extraordinarily clever and typically unfazed by anything. he and I became MPs at the same time, on the same day. So we were part of the 2015 intake. And that he was serious. He is a serious man. This is a man, and I am so grateful for it, who has never failed in his professional life. He has succeeded. He is determined and has succeeded in things that he knows need to be done. You don't get to be Director of Public Prosecutions at his age. You do not get to be called. You do not get the Barrister of the Year, the Human Rights Lawyer of the Year. You don't get any of those awards unless there is a huge amount about you. And also, they don't make. So some of you may not realise, but it is speculated that Bridget Jones's diary, Mr. Darcy, is based on Keir Starmer.
No.
Did you not know?
No, that's a brilliant fact.
Yes, because of who he was the leading human rights lawyer at the time.
Oh, so Colin Firth is really Keir Starmer. New conspiracy unlocked.
He really is. Yeah. You heard it here. No, so look, but Keir is an amazing man. He could have talked the talk about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. He didn't. The day he got elected, he called me, he called Margaret, and made promises to us about fixing it. He said it in his speech, and look, we were hurt. We'd been horribly, horribly hurt by the Labour Party and by people associated with the party at the time. And he underpromised, as it turned out, and over-delivered. And if he can do that for me, I know he'll do it for the country. This is a good thing. This is a really good thing. And for the first time since the 2010 general election, the Labour Party look like they can form the next government. I'll take that every day of the week.
Amazing. We have a couple of quick fire questions to end. Go. So, who is your biggest role model?
My mother.
Okay, so would you rather never step foot in Westminster again or get elected as a Tory MP?
Never step foot in Westminster again.
Yeah, probably a good answer.
What is your favourite reality TV show?
Oh, I hate them.
All of them.
I find them completely cringeworthy. In a like seeing other people, I really, it's not me.
Favorite Jewish food?
Chicken soup.
And finally, Edward Isaacs or Joel Rosen?
Oh, both. Always. I'm going to get in trouble. Oh no, I'm not answering that question. I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to us today. We've had an absolutely brilliant time, and it was so lovely to hear all of your experiences, such incredible experiences that you've had in your incredible career.
Yeah, no, it's been an honor. Thank you very much. It's been really great.
Complete pleasure. Lovely to do it, and good luck to everyone who's listening.
So that was Daniel and I speaking to Baroness Anderson. She's quite a formidable woman, I think. I'd say.
I completely agree.
I think just all from, personally, I think the way that she speaks about, the women in her life and her family and like her Jewish roots as being like her constant companions throughout her life, I think was completely so interesting. I think, especially as she talks about her Judaism, and it's her balance in saying her Judaism is important to her, but at the same time, like being an MP who happens to be Jewish.
Yeah. I mean, also, with everything that she's achieved, even before the anti-Semitism stuff, she's just so impressive. And like, I think she's just such an amazing role model for the Jewish community, as well as a leader that we can all look up to.
I agree, because I think what I love is how relatable she is. Like, how many people do we know who do like politics and international relations at Birmingham? Like, anyone could be the next Ruth Smeeth, honestly.
Yeah, no, it's true. She was just really, really great, and she gave us such a great insight into what she went through during the anti-Semitism, and to sort of deal with all of that, and to with Margaret Hodge, Luciana, and Louise. I think very, very few people could deal with it as well as she did. I
need to echo what she said about Margaret Hodge just being really cool. I went to the reception of Lord Mann, who's the parliamentary advisor on anti-Semitism. He did a launch and his report on anti-Semitism in higher education. And Margaret Hodge turned up. She was wearing Nike Air Forces with a green tick and a matching green blazer.
Oh.
She's nearly 80, and I just think that is such a slay thing to do.
She's iconic.
She's so iconic. Thank you so much for coming, Daniel.
Well, thank you.
Fabulous.
Yeah, it was really, really great. I enjoyed being in the nice air-conditioned UJS office with, and a big thank you to Matty as well for being here and making sure that everything's gone okay.
And thank you to you for listening. Please stay tuned for more podcasts and keep updated via our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we'll see you soon.